Commander Vexistar had worked at the monitoring station for 23 cycles, watching empty space for threats that never came. His job was boring, scanning the dark void between stars, logging asteroid movements, and filing reports that nobody read. But today was different, very different. The alarm systems screamed across the station as something impossible appeared on his screens. A massive object was moving toward the Veil Nebula at incredible speed. Vextar's 4 eyes widened as he studied the readings. This wasn't like any ship in the galactic database. The energy signatures made no sense. Power levels spiked and dropped randomly, like the ship was constantly breaking down and fixing itself. The hull materials were a nightmare. 17 different types of metal and composite materials that should never work together. Some parts glowed with hegemony plasma technology. Others showed the crystalline structure of Vorthan armor plating, and scattered throughout were materials that didn't match anything in their records. Most disturbing were the communication frequencies. The ship was broadcasting on channels that had been dead for centuries, old military bands from the Great Wars that ended before Vextar was even born. These were frequencies that only appeared in history books and museum displays. "Sir," his communications officer Zeklo called out, tentacles shaking with nervous energy. "The vessel is responding to our standard hails. But, sir, the response is coming from those ancient frequencies." Vextar leaned forward in his chair, manipulating the controls with practiced efficiency. The translation matrix worked overtime as an unfamiliar voice filled the command center. "This is Captain Jiho of the human vessel Perseverance," the voice said in heavily accented galactic standard. The pronunciation was strange, like someone learning the language from old recordings. "We are requesting safe passage through your territorial space. Our navigation systems indicate this is the fastest route to our home sector. We mean no harm and just want to get back to our families." The silence in the command center was deafening. Humans were legends, species mentioned in ancient exploration reports from the Outer Rim territories. The old surveys described them as bipedal creatures from a small blue planet, but no official contact had ever been established. Most scientists believed they had destroyed themselves in primitive wars or been absorbed by the expanding galactic civilizations. Yet here was proof. They still existed, flying through space in something that looked like it had been built in a scrapyard by someone with more determination than sense. The ship's exterior was a patchwork of hull plates, welded joints, and what appeared to be emergency repairs that had become permanent fixtures. Energy conduits ran along the outside of the hull like glowing veins, and several sections were clearly not original construction. Vextar activated his personal scanner and focused on the human vessel. The readings were even more confusing up close. The ship wasn't just built from different materials, it was actively adapting to space conditions. Hull sections were shifting slightly. Power was being rerouted through backup systems that appeared to be backups for other backup systems, and the entire structure seemed to be held together by some combination of advanced engineering and stubborn refusal to fall apart. "Sir, what are your orders?" Zeklo asked quietly. Vextar stared at the impossible ship on his screen. In all his years of monitoring deep space, he had never encountered anything like this. The human vessel defied every principle of spacecraft design he had learned in the academy. Yet somehow it was flying through space faster than most military cruisers. "Contact Admiral Kexar immediately," he finally said. "Tell him we have a situation that requires immediate attention. And Zeklo, make sure you record everything. Something tells me this is going to change everything we thought we knew about the galaxy." Admiral Kexar had commanded interceptor fleets for over 30 years. He knew how these encounters usually went. Unknown vessel enters restricted space. His ships surround them. The intruders either surrender or get blown to pieces. Simple, clean, efficient. But as his 7 warships moved into attack formation, around the human vessel, nothing felt simple anymore. His tactical officer's voice cracked with confusion. "Sir, I'm reading weapon signatures that don't match anything in our database. These humans have somehow attached plasma cannons directly to missile launch tubes. The energy feedback alone should have destroyed their ship." Kexar studied his display screens, watching the human vessel turn slowly to face his fleet. The ship called Perseverance looked like someone had raided a dozen different military junkyards and welded the pieces together. Point defense turrets moved with smooth, almost living movements, tracking his ships with precision that made his spine tingle with unease. "Admiral," his communications officer called out, "the human captain is hailing us." "Put it through," Kexhar ordered, expecting threats or desperate pleas for mercy. Instead, Captain Jiho's voice filled the bridge with warm enthusiasm. "Greetings, Admiral. What beautiful ships you have there. So perfectly designed, so symmetrical. We really do appreciate fine craftsmanship when we see it. Your engineers must be very proud of their work." The compliment caught Kexhar off guard. Most species either cowered or blustered when facing his fleet. This human sounded like she was admiring art at a museum. "Human vessel, you have entered restricted military space without authorization. State your business immediately." "Oh, we're just passing through," Jiho replied cheerfully. "Our star charts show this as the most direct route home. We've been away from Earth for quite some time, and frankly, we're getting homesick. You know how it is." Kexhar's weapons officer leaned close to whisper urgently. "Sir, our targeting computers can't get a lock on their ship. The energy signature keeps changing every few seconds. It's like the vessel is constantly rebuilding itself from the inside out." Looking at his own screens, Kexhar could see what his officer meant. The human ship's power readings fluctuated wildly. Sections would go dark, then light up brighter than before. Entire weapon arrays seemed to shut down and restart with different configurations. It was like watching a living creature adapt to threats in real time. "Human vessel, you will prepare for immediate boarding inspection," Kexhar announced, using his most authoritative tone. "Drop your shields and power down all weapon systems." "Of course, Admiral," Jiho responded with that same unsettling cheerfulness. "We're always happy to cooperate with local authorities. Our airlocks are ready for your inspection team. Just a friendly warning, though. When you board, try to avoid Corridor C. We're having some electrical issues there, lots of sparks flying around, and probably best not to touch anything that's glowing green. That's our jury-rigged power coupling system, and while it works perfectly fine, it can be a bit temperamental with non-human biology." She paused for a moment, and Kexhar could hear what sounded like explosions and alarms in the background. "Oh, and if you hear any loud banging sounds, don't worry. That's just our engineer Hyunwoo performing routine maintenance on the fusion reactor. He likes to use what we call the percussive repair method. Very effective, though it can be startling, if you're not used to it." Kexhar felt his confidence draining away. The human ship looked like it was held together with spare parts and determination, yet his advanced military computers couldn't even target it properly, and the captain was treating a military inspection like she was inviting guests over for dinner. "Prepare the boarding party," he ordered quietly, "and tell them to bring extra medical supplies. Something tells me they're going to need them." The airlock hissed open, and Admiral Kexhar's boarding party stepped into what could only be described as organized chaos. Lieutenant Minji stood, waiting for them, a young human woman with oil stains on her uniform and a welcoming smile that seemed completely out of place on a warship. She casually stepped over a bundle of exposed power cables that crackled with electricity, sparks flying dangerously close to her boots. "Welcome aboard the Perseverance," she said, with genuine enthusiasm, as if she was greeting tourists rather than a military inspection team. "Sorry about the mess, we're running a bit hot today. Our fusion reactor has been having some strong opinions about the course corrections we made yesterday. You know how temperamental these old systems can get, the T." Hegemony engineer in the boarding party stared in horror at the exposed conduits. In his 40 years of service, he had never seen anything like this. Power cables that should have been safely enclosed in protective housing were instead running along the walls like decorative lighting. Some were held in place with what appeared to be ordinary metal clips, others were simply taped to the bulkheads. As they moved deeper into the ship, the violations of basic safety protocols became even more obvious. The corridor walls were a patchwork of different materials, sections of Vorthon crystalline armor, plating next to chunks of hegemony composite hull material, with gaps filled in using what looked like scavenged metal from civilian transport. Ships. Each piece was a different color and texture, creating a rainbow effect that was somehow both beautiful and terrifying. "How do you know which systems are working?" asked the hegemony's chief inspector, pointing at a series of emergency lights that flickered in seemingly random patterns. Minji glanced up at the lights and nodded knowingly. Oh, those aren't random at all. Red flash twice means the reactor's running hot. Blue steady means life support is optimal. Green flickering means we're low on power reserves. And that yellow strobe pattern means Hyunwoo is working on the engines. Again. We've developed our own communication system over the years. They passed a junction box that made the hegemony engineers' blood run cold. The housing was cracked open, revealing a tangle of wires and components that were held together with what appeared to be metallic tape. Electricity arced between connections that should never have been made, and the whole assembly vibrated with barely contained energy. This conduit array, the engineer stammered, his voice high with panic. According to every safety protocol in the galaxy, this should have exploded days ago. The power load alone would melt most materials, and the incompatible connection types should have caused a cascade failure. Minji looked at the junction box with obvious affection and gave it a gentle pat. Oh, that's old Reliable. She's been giving us trouble for months now, but she just keeps working. We've tried to replace her 3 times, but every time we install a new system, it fails within hours. This old girl just refuses to quit. She pointed to a series of smaller boxes running along the ceiling. See all those? Those are backup systems, and the ones behind them are backups for the backups, and we've got another set of backups in the next corridor just in case. When you're this far from home, you learn to prepare for everything. The inspection team exchanged worried glances. Nothing they were seeing should have been possible. The human ship appeared to be held together by determination and creative problem-solving rather than proper engineering. Yet somehow, it was not. Only functional, but had apparently been traveling through deep space for an extended period. As they continued their tour, more impossibilities revealed themselves. Systems that should have been incompatible were working in harmony. Emergency repairs had become permanent solutions, and everywhere they looked, human ingenuity had found ways to make the impossible work through sheer stubborn refusal to accept failure. The Vorthan pirates struck without warning, emerging from the asteroid field like hungry predators. 12 sleek attack vessels surrounded the inspection convoy, their weapons already charging for the kill. Admiral Kexhar's fleet immediately moved into defensive formation, preparing to shield what they assumed was a helpless human cargo ship. All vessels, protect the human vessel, Kexhar ordered over the fleet communications. They have no military experience and their ship appears to be held together with scrap metal. But Captain Jiho's voice cut through the comm channel with surprising calmness. Admiral, we appreciate the concern, but we've got this handled. Hyunwoo, bring us around 40 degrees to starboard. Minho, it's time for aggressive maintenance protocol. Kexhar watched in confusion as the human ship began moving toward the attacking pirates instead of seeking cover behind his warships. The Perseverance didn't try to dodge the incoming plasma bolts and missile strikes. Instead, it seemed to welcome them. The first wave of pirate fire struck the human vessel directly. Kexhar expected to see the ship break apart, or at least suffer massive damage. Instead, something incredible happened. The outer armor plates that took direct hits didn't just absorb the energy. They were designed to be blown off in specific sequences, each explosion redirecting the blast force to propel the ship forward faster. Sir, his tactical officer reported. With growing amazement, the humans are using the enemy fire as additional propulsion. Each hit is making them faster and more maneuverable. A massive torpedo struck the Perseverance's engine section, causing what should have been a catastrophic explosion. But instead of destroying the ship, the humans somehow channeled the blast through their exhaust systems, converting the destructive force into a powerful burst of forward momentum that sent them rocketing toward the nearest pirate vessel. Then, something even more impossible happened. A section of hull plating that had been loosened by the earlier impacts suddenly detached from the human ship. But it wasn't random debris. It flew with purpose and precision, slamming into a pirate cruiser's weapon array and completely disabling their main guns. They're using their own ship as ammunition, Kexhar's tactical officer whispered in disbelief. They're literally throwing pieces of their vessel at the enemy as weapons. The pirates, clearly confused by tactics that made no sense, concentrated their fire on the human ship's point defense systems. Standard military doctrine said that once those guns were disabled, the vessel would be helpless against incoming torpedoes. But the humans had other ideas. Through his view screen, Kexhar, watched in horror as human crew members actually climbed onto the damaged gun turrets. They were manually aiming and firing the weapons while riding them like some kind of combat vehicle, completely exposed to the vacuum of space in nothing but emergency suits. "Incoming torpedo, bearing 27 Mark IV, came Minho's voice. Over the comm, surprisingly cheerful for someone facing certain death. "Got it," replied another human voice. "Jinwoo, swing us around. I'm going to catch this one manually." Kexhar watched as one of the humans, strapped to the outside of a point defense cannon, physically grabbed an incoming torpedo with a mechanical arm and redirected it back toward the pirates. The explosive struck a pirate ship's bridge, sending the vessel spinning out of control. The remaining pirates began to retreat, but the humans weren't finished. The Perseverance launched what appeared to be escape pods, but as they flew toward the fleeing ships, Kexar realized they weren't escape pods at all. They were improvised ramming devices, each one piloted by a human crew member who somehow ejected at the last second before impact. Within minutes, the entire pirate fleet was either destroyed or fleeing in panic. The human ship, now missing several sections of hull and trailing sparks from a dozen different systems, slowly turned back toward the convoy. "All systems nominal," Captain Jiho reported cheerfully. "Sorry about the fireworks display, Admiral. We'll have everything patched up and ready to go in about an hour. Yanwoo's already started welding the new hull plates we picked up from those pirates." Kexhar stared at his screens in stunned silence, realizing that everything he thought he knew about space combat had just been proven completely wrong. Admiral Kexhar sat alone in his private quarters, staring at the holographic display that showed the battle footage for what felt like the 100th time. The blue light from the projector cast strange shadows across his face as he watched the impossible events unfold again and again. Each viewing only made things more confusing. He paused the recording at the moment when the human ship used its own hull plating as projectile weapons. According to every military treaty in the Galactic database, this violated at least 4 different warfare conventions. Using your own vessel as ammunition was considered both reckless endangerment and improper use of military resources. But the humans had done it so naturally, like it was standard procedure. The next violation came when they manually operated damaged weapon systems. Galactic military law strictly prohibited exposing crew members to combat situations without proper life support systems. Yet the humans had climbed onto their gun turrets in basic emergency suits, treating the deadly vacuum of space like it was just another workplace hazard. Kexhar counted 17 separate treaty violations in total, but none of them seemed intentional. The humans weren't trying to break the rules. They simply operated by completely different principles. Their weapons weren't designed to be weapons. They were tools adapted for combat. Their defenses weren't meant to protect. They were meant to redirect and absorb damage in ways that actually helped their ship perform better. Most disturbing of all, their tactics weren't really tactics in any recognizable sense. They were more like controlled chaos, a series of improvised responses that somehow worked together perfectly. It was like watching someone win a chess game by eating the pieces and claiming victory through superior nutrition. A soft chime indicated someone was requesting entry to his quarters. "Come in," Kexhar called out, not looking away from the display. His aide, Lieutenant Zolkar, entered with obvious nervousness. The young officer had been jumpy ever since witnessing the human combat demonstration. "Admiral, the human captain has sent another communication. She's requesting detailed star charts for navigation to something called Earth space. She says they need to report back to their home base." Kexhar finally turned away from the hologram. "That seems reasonable. Provide them with standard navigation data for their region of space." "Sir," Zolkar continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, "there's something else. Captain Jiho mentioned that the Perseverance is classified in their fleet as a light science vessel. She said it's designed for exploration and research missions." The Admiral felt his primary heart skip several beats. Science vessel. But we saw them destroy an entire pirate fleet using tactics that defied physics. "Yes, sir." When I asked for clarification, she laughed and said their actual warships are built for serious work and are much less delicate than the Perseverance. Zolkar paused, consulting his notes. She also mentioned that their military vessels are designed with what she called proper redundancy systems and real armor plating. Kexhar looked back at the frozen image of the human ship on his display. The Perseverance was a patchwork of salvaged materials, jury-rigged systems, and emergency repairs that had become permanent features. Hull sections were missing. Entire weapon arrays appeared to be held together with metallic tape, and power conduits ran along the outside of the ship like glowing decorations. If this ramshackle collection of spare parts and determination was considered a delicate science vessel, what did that say about their actual military fleet? The thought made his secondary heart start racing as well. "Sir, should I prepare a report for Galactic Command?" Zolkar asked. Kexhar stared at the human ship for a long moment, imagining what a fleet of purpose-built human warships might look like. Ships that weren't held together by hope and creative engineering, but actually designed from the beginning for combat. The possibilities were terrifying. "Yes," he finally said, "but mark it as classified at the highest levels. And Zolkar? Start preparing evacuation plans for this entire sector. Something tells me the galaxy is about to become a much more interesting place." The great dome of the Galactic Council chamber had never seen anything like this. Representatives from 47 different species sat in their designated sections, all watching the same holographic display with expressions ranging from fascination to outright terror. The emergency session had been called within hours of receiving Admiral Kexhar's report, and now the entire governing body of the galaxy was trying to process what they were seeing. The combat footage played for the third time, showing the human vessel Perseverance engaging the Vorthun pirates. Each viewing seemed to reveal new impossibilities that the counselors had missed before. Heated discussions erupted in dozens of different languages as species representatives tried to understand what they were witnessing. "Order! Order!" called the council speaker, a tall crystalline being whose voice resonated through the chamber's translation systems. "We will hear the military analysis first." Commander Thexvel of the Hegemony Military Academy stood at the central podium, his usually confident demeanor replaced by obvious distress. His report had been delayed by what medical staff diplomatically called acute stress reaction to impossible engineering phenomena. "Honorable councillors," he began, his voice shaky, "the human vessel demonstrates engineering practices that violate every principle we consider fundamental to spacecraft design. What they call percussive maintenance, essentially hitting broken systems with heavy tools until they work, has somehow proven more effective than our most advanced repair protocols." He gestured to a specific section of the recording, where sparks flew from damaged systems, while human crew members worked calmly around them. When their primary fusion reactor experienced a critical overload that should have destroyed the ship, they deliberately channeled the explosion through their waste management system. This not only prevented catastrophic failure, but actually increased their thruster output by 30%. Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the assembly. The Vorthun representative, whose species prided themselves on elegant engineering solutions, made a sound that could only be described as mechanical weeping. Councillor Zefani of the Trade Federation raised one of her 6 arms to request recognition. Her species had spent centuries perfecting efficient manufacturing processes, and the human approach seemed to challenge everything they believed about proper construction techniques. "Our engineering teams have conducted preliminary analysis of the human methods," she announced, her voice filled with concern. "We believe their entire philosophy can be summarized as follows. If something is broken, find a way to make it work anyway. If something is working properly, modify it until it either works better or breaks in a more interesting way." The recording switched to show Captain Jiho giving Admiral Kexhar's inspection team a tour of her ship. She stood cheerfully in a corridor filled with exposed electrical systems, sparks flying around her head as she explained their adaptive maintenance protocols with the enthusiasm of someone discussing a hobby. "As you can see," her voice echoed through the council chamber, "we've learned to work with our equipment's personality quirks. When the lights flicker like this, it means the reactor wants more attention. When that alarm sounds, it's just the life support system reminding us to check the air filters. And that burning smell, that's completely normal. It means the backup power coupling is working extra hard today. Several counselors required immediate medical attention. The representative from the Precision Engineering Guild suffered what appeared to be a complete system crash and had to be carried out by maintenance drones. The footage continued showing humans casually stepping over dangerous electrical hazards, using broken equipment as if it was functioning normally, and somehow making critical repairs while the systems were still active and potentially lethal. What made it even more disturbing was their obvious comfort with these conditions. "The implications are staggering," continued Commander Thexval, consulting his notes with trembling hands. "3 species have already begun redesigning their engineering protocols based on human methods. The Corellian shipyards are experimenting with controlled redundancy failures, and the Zephyrian Academy has added a course called Creative Problem Solving Under Impossible Conditions." The Council speaker called for a recess as more representatives required medical assistance. The simple fact that human engineering actually worked despite violating every known principle was causing what physicians were calling logic-induced cognitive trauma among the galaxy's most advanced minds. As the session paused, one question hung in the air. If this was how humans built their science vessels, what horrors awaited when they encountered the human military fleet? The alarm klaxons wailed across Admiral Kexhar's flagship as his sensor operator's voice cracked with disbelief. "Sir, I'm detecting multiple contacts approaching our position. Long-range sensors are picking up. This can't be right." Kexhar rushed to the sensor station, his 4 eyes scanning the readouts that made absolutely no sense. 16 distinct energy signatures were heading toward them at incredible speed, but each one was completely different from the others. It was like looking at a fleet assembled from 16 different galaxies, each following their own rules of physics. "Talk to me, Sensor Operator Veltan," Kexhar ordered, trying to keep his voice steady. "Sir, each vessel has a unique power signature. This one appears to be running on crystallized energy matrices like the old hegemony designs. That one is using plasma fusion cores similar to Vorthon technology, and this ship here..." Veltan paused, double-checking his readings. "This one seems to be powered by controlled gravitational collapse, which shouldn't be possible for a vessel that size." Through the main view screen, Admiral Kexhar watched as the human rescue fleet came into visual range. What he saw defied every principle of fleet organization he had learned in 4 decades of military service. Each ship looked like it had been built by a completely different civilization, then modified by engineers who treated the laws of physics as friendly suggestions rather than absolute rules. The lead vessel appeared to be constructed primarily from Corellian crystal steel, but with human modifications that included external weapon pods and what looked like a greenhouse dome attached to the upper hull. The second ship was clearly based on a Zephyrian cargo hauler design, but the humans had added so many additional engines that it looked more like a flying engine with a small crew compartment attached. "Incoming transmission from the lead vessel," his communications officer announced. The voice that filled the bridge was cheerful and energetic, with the same unsettling enthusiasm that Captain Jiho had displayed. "Greetings, Admiral Kexhar. This is Captain Seokjin of the Human Vessel Resilience. We're here to collect our wayward science team and hopefully haven't caused too much trouble for your people. I hope Jiho and her crew were polite guests." Kexhar found his voice after a moment of stunned silence. "Captain Seokjin, your fleet displays highly unusual construction methods. Are these captured vessels from various species?" Seokjin's laugh echoed through the bridge. "Oh no, Admiral. These are all human-built ships. We just have a philosophy of using whatever works best for each specific job. Why limit yourself to one design approach when the galaxy is full of good ideas waiting to be improved?" As the fleet moved closer, Kexhar could see more impossible details. One ship appeared to be 3 different vessels welded together end to end, creating something that looked like a space-going train. Another had rotating sections that spun independently while the central hull remained stable. A third vessel seemed to be missing its entire outer hull, exposing internal systems that glowed with their own light. "Sir," Veltan reported with growing amazement, "they're maintaining perfect formation despite having completely different propulsion systems. Some are using traditional chemical rockets, others have ion drives, and at least 2 are using propulsion methods I can't even identify. The most disturbing aspect wasn't the ships themselves, but how they moved together. Despite their chaotic appearance and incompatible technologies, the human fleet flowed through space with organic precision. They compensated for each other's limitations seamlessly, like they had been designed as a single organism, rather than 16 separate vessels. "Captain Jiho," Seokjin's voice continued over the comm, "are you ready to head home? The engineering department back at Earth Base is eager to hear about your latest modifications to the Perseverance. Apparently your report about using waste management systems for emergency propulsion has caused quite a stir." Admiral Kexhar watched as the human science vessel began moving toward the rescue fleet. Even now, after everything he had witnessed, the Perseverance continued to violate his understanding of how spacecraft should behave. Sections of hull plating were still missing from the battle with the pirates, yet the ship flew as if it was in perfect condition. The formation of human vessels reminded him of something he had seen in nature documentaries, a school of fish moving as one entity, despite being composed of individual creatures. But these weren't fish. They were impossible machines held together by human stubbornness and creativity, operating in harmony despite following no recognizable engineering principles. The carefully planned first contact protocols that Admiral Kexhar had studied for years completely fell apart within the first 10 minutes of the human rescue fleet's arrival. Instead of the formal diplomatic exchanges outlined in the Galactic Contact Manual, the humans treated the entire situation like a friendly neighborhood gathering. Captain Jiwon of the vessel Determination docked with Kexhar's flagship and immediately began unloading cargo containers filled with what she cheerfully called friendship gifts. She was a small human woman with grease-stained coveralls and an infectious smile that made even the most hardened military officers feel oddly comfortable. "Admiral Kexhar," she called out as she hauled a heavy crate across the docking bay. "We brought you some presents. Nothing fancy, just some spare parts and technical manuals that might come in handy. We always like to share what we've learned with new friends." The crate she presented contained the most bizarre collection of components Kexhar had ever seen. There were power coupling units that appeared to be from hegemony technology, but modified with additional connection ports. Energy regulators from Vorthan systems had been fitted with human-designed bypass circuits, and scattered throughout were completely unfamiliar devices that hummed with their own internal power. "These are universal spare parts," Jiwon explained proudly. "We've figured out how to make components from different species' technologies work together. That little box there can adapt any power source to any system, and those connectors can link up equipment that was never meant to be compatible." Along with the spare parts came a thick technical manual with a cover that made Kexhar's engineering staff extremely nervous. The title read, "Basic Repair Techniques for Non-Human Technology. A Human Guide to Keeping Alien Ships Running When Everything Goes Wrong." Kexhar opened the manual to the first chapter, titled, "When Your Reactor Explodes, Advanced Containment." Through creative ventilation, the opening paragraph casually discussed methods for redirecting reactor explosions through various ship systems to minimize damage while maximizing the useful energy output from the blast. "We noticed your ships are very purposeful," Jiwon continued, walking around Kexhar's pristine flagship with obvious appreciation. "Beautiful work, really elegant design. Your engineers clearly put a lot of thought into making everything look perfect and function smoothly." She paused near a maintenance panel, running her hand along the seamless hull plating. "But you might want to consider adding more redundancy systems. Space is pretty unforgiving to designs that prioritize beauty over survivability. When things go wrong out here, and they always do, you want your ship to keep working even when half the systems are offline." While Jiwon spoke, her crew members were already offering to help upgrade the alien vessels to human survivability standards. They swarmed over Kexhar's ships with tools and spare parts, pointing out potential weak points and suggesting modifications that made the alien engineers break out in cold sweats. "See this power coupling here?" one human technician explained, to a terrified hegemony engineer. "It's a single point of failure. If this goes down, you lose propulsion, life support, and weapons all at once. But if we add these bypass circuits and backup power feeds, You can lose 3/4 of your systems and still limp home. The modifications they suggested violated every aesthetic principle of alien ship design. But the logic was undeniably sound. The humans weren't trying to make the ships prettier. They were trying to make them nearly indestructible. Captain Jiho appeared as the gift-giving ceremony continued, still covered in the scorch marks and hull patches from her battle with the pirates. She surveyed the controlled chaos of humans and aliens, working together with obvious satisfaction. "The trick," she told Admiral Kexhar in a conversation that would be quoted in military academies for generations, "is to build ships that are too stubborn to die. Pretty is nice, but pretty doesn't keep your crew alive when everything goes wrong at the worst possible moment." As the human fleet prepared to depart, they left behind not just spare parts and manuals, but a completely new way of thinking about spacecraft design that would revolutionize galactic engineering forever. The human fleet's departure left the galaxy in a state of controlled chaos that would reshape interstellar civilization forever. Admiral Kexhar stood on his bridge, watching the strange collection of human vessels disappear into hyperspace, their mismatched engines creating light patterns that no textbook had ever described. Behind them, they left a fleet of alien ships that looked nothing like they had just days before. Every vessel in Kexhar's fleet now sported what the humans cheerfully called survivability upgrades. His pristine flagship, once a masterpiece, so of hegemony engineering elegance, now had external power conduits running along the hull like glowing veins. Backup systems had been installed in every available space, and the bridge now featured a manual override station that looked suspiciously like it had been built from spare parts and determination. The modifications weren't pretty, but they worked with terrifying efficiency. When his engineering staff ran diagnostics, they discovered that their ships could now function with up to 70% system failures. What had once been fatal damage was now merely an inconvenience that required creative problem-solving. News of the human encounter spread through galactic communication networks faster than any previous first contact event. The footage of the Perseverance's battle tactics became the most watched military recording in galactic history, studied by strategists who struggled to understand how chaos could be so effective. Within weeks, the Galactic Council was forced to create entirely new classification systems for spacecraft. The traditional categories of military vessel, civilian transport, and research ship were expanded to include functionally impossible for ships that worked despite violating known physics, theoretically inoperable for vessels that shouldn't exist but somehow did, and the dreaded human standard for craft that operated on principles of organized chaos and stubborn refusal to break down. Engineering academies across the galaxy scrambled to update their curricula. The prestigious Corellian Institute of Advanced Technology added courses with names that would have been considered jokes just months earlier: adaptive chaos theory, percussive maintenance techniques, and emergency engineering, making the impossible work until you can fix it properly. The hegemony's most elite engineering school went even further, establishing an entire department dedicated to what they officially called human-inspired survivability engineering. The department's motto, carved in crystal above the entrance, read, "If it's broken, hit it harder. If it's not broken, make it better until it breaks interestingly." Captain Jiho's final transmission before jumping to hyperspace became legendary, quoted in engineering textbooks and military manuals throughout the galaxy. Her words echoed through space with simple wisdom that challenged thousands of years of sophisticated design philosophy. Thanks for the hospitality, friends. Remember, the universe doesn't care how elegant your designs are, only whether they work when everything goes wrong. And in space, everything always goes wrong eventually. The transmission continued with her characteristic cheerfulness. Build your ships like you're expecting the worst day possible, then make them ready for something even worse than that. Pretty is nice, but stubborn is what gets you home to your family. As months passed, the true impact of the human encounter became clear. It wasn't their weapons that had changed galactic thinking, though their combat tactics were now studied in every military academy. It wasn't their technology, though their universal spare parts had revolutionized repair protocols across dozens of species. The real revolution was philosophical. Humanity had proven that sophisticated technology and elegant design were luxuries that space couldn't afford. What mattered was determination, creativity, and the absolute refusal to accept that anything couldn't be fixed, improved, or repurposed into something useful. The galaxy's greatest minds finally understood what made humans truly terrifying. It wasn't their ability to fight or their skill with technology. It was their complete inability to stay broken, their stubborn insistence that every problem had a solution, and their cheerful determination to keep trying until they found it. In the end, the most frightening thing about human starships wasn't their firepower or their strange construction methods. It was the simple fact that no matter how badly damaged they became, they just refused to die.